Well, Malcolm, Kenya, thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I just want to start by saying congratulations on the podcast. Oh, there we go.
Thank you.
So I just want to say congratulations on the podcast. It truly is very, very insightful. I mean, I would not expect anything less from both of you, but I just want to start by asking, I mean, what is the backstory to how you came to this? I know it was something about meeting each other at dinner for the first time, so I just want to understand exactly what sparked the Unusual Suspects.
Well, Kenya, we'd known each other since way back when. Kenya came up to me in a restaurant in Venice, California, and then got back in touch a couple years later, and then he just came. He just came to me and said, "You want to do something?" I just thought it'd be so much fun that it's all his doing. I got roped into this, but happily roped in.
I'm a fan of Malcolm, who I'm lucky enough to can call him my friend now. But I love unusual pairings because unusual pairings usually aren't unusual. You know what I'm saying? They're actually complementary. And I have so many times used Malcolm's books and the things in them to sort of push ahead things that I'm doing and sort of make me seem smarter at dinner parties. But I also felt like this was a world in which I really enjoy reading books, really, really, really enjoy reading books. Malcolm's one of the few books, him and Candace Bushnell for some reason, but
Nice.
he's one of the few authors that that crossed me into the Audible world of like listening to books. He has such a specific, David Sedaris is another one, but like such a specific way of delivering what I would have read in a certain way in a different way. And I thought about, I hate my voice, but I do love the
You gotta
fact
love yourself more, Kevin. Come on now.
It's okay. No, I embrace my self-deprecation, but I love the idea that I found the curiosity that Malcolm had was a lot of the curiosity in which I like doing television shows and talking about things. And I called and he was game, and Audible was game, and we've had a really good time doing it.
I love that. And I'm so glad that you mentioned that it's not so unusual, the things that connect people, because I know when this was first announced, that was sort of like in the first paragraph of every story. It's like, Malcolm and Kenya, it's such an unusual pairing. And I'm like, in my mind, I'm like, is it that unusual? So like, I'd love to hear a little bit about your dynamic as like co-host of this podcast.
What is our dynamic?
Good cop, bad cop.
No, I don't know. It's good. I mean, I enjoy poking a little fun at Kenya from time to time.
Do you enjoy it, Kenya?
I enjoy it. I mean, I think that we both try to be sincere and honest with the stuff that we don't know. It's always like, you don't know this, you don't know that, you know. And
I've just been lecturing him about this movie Rockers, which he didn't know about.
You knew about it?
Unbelievable.
I didn't know about it.
This is unbelievable.
I'm sorry. This is a
the
teachable moment.
gaps in cultural knowledge among black men right now.
You should go buy Rockers. You can probably buy it for $48.
No, you can't. No. It is a cult classic. When you watch it, and you call me and you say, when you call me in tears and say, I can't believe I was not exposed to this movie for the first 40 years of my life, then we're going to have a conversation.
Watch Rockers. No, I'm going to. All right. But I want to hear more about this, truly this dynamic, because I know you two, in listening to the podcast, you have different approaches how you interview guests. You have just what is that about? Like, just break that down for me a little bit.
Do we have? I mean, we have different. I mean, one of the appeals of doing the show was that I got exposed to Kenya's world and he got exposed to mine, because our interests are obviously different. That's sort of, I'm not wholly different, but. And that was fun because I just got a chance to sit with people who I would normally never sit with.
Yeah.
I got a place at the table, which was kind of great.
I think that's what we all really want. And I think those are the best moments. You know what I'm saying? There's nothing like going to a dinner party. My friend used to put together dinner parties with people who didn't know each other.
Love that.
And they would make you not sit with your partner, and you had to sit next to someone else. And I was like, this is a great format, because you actually get to learn something, and by the middle of the third course, you're actually having real conversation. And I think that's what the power of letting yourself into worlds that you thought you wouldn't be into. I think the scariest thing ever to me when there was a few years ago, people were talking about safe spaces, and I was on my kids about it. I think there's nothing less safe than a safe space.
Oh.
Because if you're in a place that everyone sort of has your point of view, and it becomes an echo chamber, one, but two, there is zero growth except in one direction.
Right.
And I think that is a really dangerous place for particularly our world and our society to be in.
That's a good point. And speaking of the guests, I mean, you have such an incredible roster. I mean, Ava DuVernay, Sue Bird, Governor Wes Moore. I mean, you've just wrangled so many amazing luminaries, really. So what makes an unusual suspect? Like, how did you get to this hopefully first season? Hopefully there's going to be a second. How did you get to this first season of guests?
Well, I mean, there are some of the suspects are more unusual than others.
Sure.
Dre's not an unusual suspect.
He's an unusual suspect in that forum. He only did it 3 times.
That's actually true. That's actually true.
Yeah.
So there's a kind of, I think what is there's a double meaning to unusual. One is that we did try to get people who aren't on the podcast circuit, who you normally hear from. But secondly, I think we wanted to have conversations with them that were unusual, that were different from the conversations they normally have. You know, David Chang, that one was a conversation where I think it went in all kinds of really interesting, weird directions that neither of us anticipated, and that made for a really, really, really compelling conversation.
Yeah, I agree. Do you have...
I feel like the same way. I feel like the idea of, we mentioned Dre not being an unusual suspect because he's such a huge producer, but to have a sit down like that with us was unusual. And we actually got him to talk about things that he wasn't even comfortable talking about, which I really liked that. You know, for me, one of my favorites was someone that Malcolm put me onto is Ursula Burns.
Oh, she's fantastic.
And she's not just fantastic. Like, she could be president.
Oh,
she
yes.
could do anything. That is a person who I look at and I say, whatever she decided to do in life, she was going to be successful at it. And there are a few people in the world that we know like that. But I felt like with her, and she was one of our first, I started seeing like that a lot of our guests probably had that thing in them, that if they decided to be successful at whatever they were going to do, they probably would do. She in particular spoke to me because she was so honest and so sincere and so humble with her accomplishments. And she just reminded me of, I hope that at that point in time in my life, I can look back and sort of have that sort of clarity and transparency to others.
Right. And I mean, that's the thing, because I mean, she was crying on her episode. I mean, like you all managed to really pull out this level of rawness, level of authenticity. So how do you find your way into those conversations? Because I think that's the whole point of the podcast. You want to really put these people in conversations that they're not normally having. So was that an easy task for you, or did you have to really kind of pull out some interviewing tactics? Like, how did you get people to be so open?
Well, I think, I mean, I can speak for myself, but I can kind of guess at Kenya. I think that both of us are sort of softies. I'm a crier myself.
Oh.
I'll cry at the drop of a hat. And if you're a crier, I think people sense that and they
True.
they want to participate.
I am a crier.
Yeah. I mean, me too, honestly. Like we could all shed a tear together. No, honestly, it's like, but I do think that if there's something to that. I think some people sense that level of understanding, level of empathy. And so, yeah, I mean, I think what you managed to do, I imagine people probably come to this podcast like knowing that that's what's expected of them. But was there anybody that you had to work a little bit harder to get that level of emotion out of it?
Ava.
Oh, I've interviewed Ava before. Yeah.
Ava, she's my sis.
Uh-huh.
But she's you have to understand, she's a publicist first. So she understands the game at a different level.
Yep.
2, she is a black woman.
Yep.
3, she went into a world that black women had not been previously sort of embraced at a later point in life.
Yep.
And so there's a guard. And she's also been taught or mentored and seen from the best from Oprah. You know what I'm saying? So she has she understands it. So I think that Malcolm had this thing that he started doing early on that we felt like and whether or not it was your this person or a surrogate version of this person, we asked people to tell us about their mom. And it's a moment that when you do that, I was like, oh, that's brilliant. And it wasn't really like maniacal, but it actually was really smart, because whether it's your mother or your surrogate mother figure, there's a softness that opens up with people, and it starts a lot of times get people to get to their core and their sort of origin stories in a much more open way.
Tell me about your mom, Kenya.
My mom is a very interesting person. She is originally of half West Indian descent and a lot of other things, but she grew up in Santa Barbara as one of the only black people in Santa Barbara. She and one of the only other black women that was friends with her, they used to sneak out of the house and drive to Los Angeles to meet black guys. And she met my dad, who lived in East LA and was selling weed and like a street guy, but she thought he was so cool. She got pregnant when she was 16. Wow. My grandmother put her out. She had to move into the projects in Pacoima. I ended up being part Pacoima, part Inglewood, but she, started her life very young and had very little time to sort of find herself. She also, my grandmother later in life became a Jehovah's Witness. Oh, wow. After practicing Santeria and doing a lot of different things. She became a Jehovah's Witness and brought my mom into it. My dad was a Muslim, a part of the Nation of Islam, so that was an interesting mix. You know what I'm saying? But
I would think so.
She went through a lot.
I guess.
She went through a lot, and I think she later in life, started trying to really figure out who she was, because she had all these things that were prescribed before her about what she was supposed to be, and I think it was only later in life, and still she's going through figuring out, who she is.
And your mom, Malcolm?
My mom is one of those powerhouse Jamaican ladies.
I know a few.
You mess with my mom at your peril. And she speaks so softly that the only way to hear her is you got to lean right in.
That's what she wants you. That's how she's going to get you.
She's 4'11", maybe on a good day. She's a very, 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 very formidable and wonderful woman.
I love it. And we talked a little bit about just the wide range of guests that you've had. So, have you noticed a through line? Like, have you noticed a connective tissue among all these guests? Like, what is that one thing that you think unites all of them?
We had a lot of black people.
A lot of black people.
There you go.
Jimmy Kimmel, who I feel like is a black man at heart because he cries.
He's a crier.
He's a crier. He cried with us. But I think one of the big things is like all the people that when I thought about this question, just for my own sake, they all had a moment that they all had faith in themselves. They had a moment where they had to have a moment where they had faith in themselves. And I think that was, if I can think back and go back and forth, like from Sue Bird, who obviously was, but she had a moment where she could have faith in herself when she moved from this powerhouse school to the other school. She had to have faith that she could do it. Sue Bird, Ursula had to have a moment. Her mom gave, but she had to have a moment where she had faith in herself, being the first black female CEO of a Fortune 500 company. Dr. Dre, being this latchkey kid, from this, had to have, living in this bad neighborhood, have faith in himself that he could get out of there with music, because rap wasn't what it was then. All these people, I feel like that was something that uniquely, I think Malcolm and I both shared. Yeah. You have to have a moment where you take a leap.
Yep.
And that is, not everyone takes that leap.
There's another simpler thing, which is one of the things I have always admired about Kenya, and that I value in people, is industriousness. I just think work ethic and productivity, I just think that's at the top of the list for me. And everyone that we interviewed is in the 99th percentile of that. They're all people who have really applied themselves to something.
Right.
And that, I think, on a kind of unconscious level is what attracted us to all of them.
Yeah, for sure. And to Kenya's point, I mean, maybe this speaks to, because one thing, when I first started listening to the podcast, it immediately leapt out to me that you had Rebel Without a Pause as like the theme song. So like, what was that choice? I mean, it's a great choice. I have no notes, but I'm curious of like how you landed on that song in particular.
I mean, Public Enemy in themselves were a break from what was going on. You know, they were a revolutionary group. They had the things that they were talking about weren't. If you're trying to talk about that today, you'd be thrown out. You know what I'm saying? But what they were talking about, and they mixed in the Nation of Islam. They mixed in, you know, political activism. They mixed in, you know, just all the things that they were doing was outside. They were the unusual suspects. Yep. You weren't expecting that from them, and I feel like when we decided to do this, and when I got an opportunity, I felt like, oh, this is actually going to happen. I felt like I wanted to feel like we could look back and listen and say that we got something different out of each person, and that I actually gained a little bit from those people, and I think we did.
Yeah, I agree completely. And so, you know, I know that a big undercurrent of the podcast is exploring what it takes to be successful, like excellence, all of that. And so I'm curious for both of you, knowing that at different stages of your life and career that may change, like what success means to you could change. So I would love to hear a little bit about what has been that evolution of how you define success and excellence for both of you.
Has it evolved?
It has evolved for me.
How has it evolved for you?
I think even just from a personal standpoint, when we started this, it was a few years ago, when we started talking about it, Malcolm came up with the name. We had a lot of different names with the unusual suspects. And it was like there's moments where you're like, yes. Mm-hmm. Like it was one of those yes moments. And I give a lot of credit to one of our producers, Kristen's fought for it because they originally told us no. And Malcolm doesn't really push back. You know what I'm saying? He's kind of like goes, but he was like, can we try to push for this? And I'm so glad that he had that moment because it was absolutely the right name. You know, and I'm into titles from whether it be Blackish or this or that. You know, titles mean a lot. And I think for me, what has changed was my life changed a lot when I got Blackish, right? From financial to like anonymity, that type of thing, a lot of it changed. During this podcast, I've been going through in and out of a divorce and then out of this and seeing Malcolm had been coming to fatherhood later in life, and I had 6 kids. I started realizing that a lot of the things that Malcolm would talk to me about sometime, and you'd see Malcolm light up, about his kids. And I remember having those moments 25 years ago. And I'm like, here's this man where he's at a different point in his life, but he's having those same feelings and so I started thinking to myself that the things that I thought about I wanted that were really important to me weren't as important to me as seeing this, iconic literary, figure who's, achieved what he wanted, but the moments that now are giving him this newfound sort of like strikes are the moments that I had when I was so much younger and I wasn't able to actually appreciate them. And I wanted to go back and say so my moments at this point in life is realizing the things that really actually land. And I happen to be doing that while I was doing this podcast. So I think that my version of success are those things that we all can share, but they don't go away, that you remember them. Because I remember them just as loudly when Malcolm would tell me them as I remember when the first time they happened with me 20 some odd years ago.
Right. Malcolm, I mean, have you had any evolution in how you define success for yourself?
I've had an evolution in how I define happiness, but I haven't. I mean, when I was a kid, I liked telling stories.
Yeah.
I thought stories were really important, and I felt that most people in my, second grade class were really bad at telling stories, and it really bothered me.
Mental from day one.
It really bothered me. I'm like, why are you doing it that way?
Timmy, there's no antagonist in your story.
And they would read, you'd read children's books to me, and I would just I'd either be very happy with them or I would just be pissed off. I would just be like, I don't understand what the author's choices are here. And I'm still exactly the same way. I was this morning on the plane. I was like working on a story I'm telling, and I get the same feeling of pleasure that I got when I was 6 years old.
Okay, so then how has your definition of happiness evolved?
Oh, well, what Kenya was talking about. I mean, happiness is, I have 2 daughters. That's my happiness.
Yeah.
That wasn't true before I had them.
I love that. And, I want to take it back again, just to the beginning a little bit, because I know for both of you, there's no shortage of projects you could be working on. I'm sure you're pitched a bunch of things. I'm sure you have a bunch of ideas in your own heads. So what clicks for you in terms of like you saying yes to something?
Mm-hmm.
I'm very interested in that myself.
Kenya says yes to everything, as far as I can tell.
That's a problem.
I'm reminded of the great basketball player Derek Coleman.
Okay.
Do you remember Derek Coleman?
Okay, yeah, I do. Yeah,
Yes,
yeah.
you do. Yes, you do.
That I get. That reference I
Remember
get.
when Derek would always say, they would ask him basically, why do you play basketball? And he would always say, CTC. Cut the check. And that is not my attitude. It's not your attitude. But that's the other attitude that I think we need to fight against.
Yeah. Yep. Got it.
No,
I got nothing against Derek. He's out there
no,
somewhere.
all kidding aside,
Do you remember, by the way, Derek saying CTC?
CDC, it was his thing. I laughed the other day. I showed someone we were talking about a deal, and he was like, we have to make sure we get the right deal. He's like, spoken in the words of Latrell Sprewell, you know what I'm saying, who just had signed a $20 million extension.
Turned down a
turned down a $20 million extension. A brother's got to feed his family.
There you go.
Another great Latrell. We may need to find Latrell and have a conversation.
That would be a great
Listen.
conversation.
Make that happen, please. But I know that there's obviously.
Dude, I did not know you have some deep NBA knowledge here because you're a young man.
Listen. Look, you're not as young as I look.
Black don't crack.
Black people.
I could be 50 for all you know. You don't know.
If you know DC and
I have 2 older brothers and a dad, so yeah, sports was a big
Somebody
thing in our
once
house.
told me, who worked for the Sixers in the day that first of all, Derek Coleman was the most talented basketball player he had ever seen, and he'd seen them all.
Yeah.
Unbelievable.
He was
and in
unholdable.
Practice, if you saw him in practice, he'd just do random shit, and you'd be like, I cannot believe a 6'10" person. He just never cared.
That's amazing.
Never cared.
Man.
So just really quickly.
Yeah, of course.
That Syracuse Orangeman team,
Oh, yeah.
for me, I know we're off topic, but that is arguably, I will put that on the most talented collegiate basketball team in the history of sports. Because everyone could do something that no one else could do. And I'm thinking about a new documentary. That might be my documentary.
There you go.
Pearl Washington?
It was
No.
Sherman Douglas,
Sherman Douglas, Derek Coleman,
Ronnie
Cycling.
Billy Owens, Ronnie Cycley.
Oh my God!
I think you're building out another podcast right now.
This is the shooting guard. I mean,
Who was the shooting
Matt
guard?
Reeves, I think it was his name. He could shoot from anywhere.
Listen, make this podcast happen. Just like random sports ephemera memories, make it happen. But I know, in just to kind of sum everything up, I know that there's so many interview style podcasts out there. There's so many podcasts. Period. What impact do you hope this podcast will have? Because you're pulling out all these incredible stories from these luminary figures. So what do you want it to do in the world to the listeners?
Well, I would go back to what I was saying about how everyone that we talked to was industrious and committed to what they were doing in this really beautiful way. And I think communicating that idea that that's where so much of happiness lies, in just throwing yourself into something, that's a really important thing to do, I think.
Yeah.
I think if we could look back and you remember the Barbara Walter interviews?
Oh, yes.
They were a thing.
Oh, yeah.
So my mom used to call her Barbara Wawa or whatever. I was like, that's offensive, Mom. But they were, to this day, you can go back and look at the Barbara Walter Trump interview. You can look at I would love if there were moments that we got to do this for a long time, or do this for a period of time, that we got to have people say things that spoke to other people in a way that stuck with them.
Yeah.
If we get to do that, we make people comfortable, I feel like that's a success.
It's beautiful. And I feel like you're going to accomplish that. It's a really fantastic podcast. So congratulations again, and thanks for being here.
Thank you
so much.
Thank you to Audible for letting us do this and
Oh, shout out to Audible.
supporting us. Thank you.
Beautiful.